My grandmother is not a woman who raises her voice. She has never, in all the years I have known her, slammed a door or used a word she would regret. So when she walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon in February, looked at me standing at the counter in a coat I'd been wearing since college because I could not afford a new one, looked at the baby asleep in the bouncy chair beside the radiator, and said, very quietly, "Isla, where has the trust gone?" I knew something had broken open that could not be put back together. I did not know what trust she meant, that was the thing. I did not know. My grandmother's name is Eleanor, and she built her money the way people in that generation built things, slowly, without talking about it. She came from Winnipeg originally, moved to Toronto in her 30s, started a property management company with one building on Davenport Road and a file cabinet she kept in her bedroom. By the time I was born, she had 16 properties and an office in Midtown and a reputation for being the kind of woman who remembered everything and forgave nothing twice. She raised me after my parents split when I was 9. My mother moved to Vancouver, and my father was not, as he put it, in a position to take on full-time parenting, which was his way of saying he did not want to. My grandmother never said anything unkind about either of them. She just made room for me in the house on Roxborough Drive and enrolled me in school and made sure there was dinner at 6 o'clock every night. And that was that. She was not effusive. She did not say "I love you" the way some people say it, casually, at the end of phone calls. But she showed up, that was what she did. She showed up and she paid attention and she made sure I knew I was not optional. When I graduated from Ryerson with a degree in social work, she took me to dinner at her favorite restaurant on Yonge Street, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a wine list the waiter recites from memory, and she told me she was proud of me. Those were the exact words. I remember them because she did not use them often, and because I could see it cost her something to say them out loud, and that made them mean more, not less. She also told me that night that she had set up a trust for me. She had done it years earlier, she said, when I came to live with her, because she wanted to make sure I would be taken care of regardless of what happened to her. The trust would distribute a certain amount each month once I turned 25. She had structured it so the funds would go into a joint account she had set up in both our names, and from there I was meant to transfer what I needed into my personal account. She had written me a letter explaining the mechanics of it, she said. She had left it in the drawer of the desk in her home office, and I should read it when I had a chance. I never read the letter. I know how that sounds, but the dinner was emotional and the wine was good, and when I got home that night I sat on my couch and called my best friend and talked for 2 hours. And by the next morning the letter felt like something I could deal with later. I was 22. Later felt very far away. I met my husband the following year at a mutual friend's housewarming in Leslieville. His name was Callum. He was charming in the particular way of men who have learned that charm is a tool. Easy smile, good listener. The kind of person who makes you feel, in the first hour of knowing him, that you are the most interesting thing in the room. His family was from Halifax originally. His mother, Wendy, had moved to Toronto after his parents divorced, and was the sort of woman who treated every space she entered as if she were doing it a favor by being there. I noticed this about her early. I chose, for a long time, to call it confidence. Callum and I dated for 2 years before we got engaged. My grandmother met him several times over that period. She was never impolite, but she was also never warm in the way she was warm with people she truly liked. She was correct, which from Eleanor means something is being evaluated and the verdict is not yet in. I told myself she was being protective. I told myself she would come around. We were married in September, outdoors at a conservation area north of the city. Small ceremony, 40 people. My grandmother was there in the front row in a grey dress and pearl earrings, and she hugged me at the reception and told me she hoped me at the reception and told me she hoped I would be happy. Not that she knew I would be, that she hoped. I filed that away somewhere I did not look at often. After the wedding, Callum suggested we consolidate our finances. He told me, much better at managing money than I was. which was true in the sense that I had never been especially interested in the mechanics of it, and he was, or seemed to be. He had spreadsheets. He talked about investment vehicles and tax efficiency with the casual fluency of someone who had studied it. I trusted him the way I trusted my dentist or my mechanic, not because I understood what they were doing, but because I assumed they did, and because they had given me no reason yet to assume otherwise. What I did not know, what I would not know for almost 3 years, was that the trust my grandmother had set up had been generating deposits into that joint account every single month since my 25th birthday. What I also did not know was that Callum had, somewhere in the administrative chaos of our first weeks of marriage, positioned himself with access to that account. He had approached it carefully. He told me the joint account my grandmother had set up was redundant now that we were married, that we should move everything into our household account, that he would handle the transfer. I signed something. I do not remember exactly what. It was presented to me between 2 other things I was signing at the time, insurance documents, I think, or the lease addendum for the apartment, and I initialed it the way you initial things when someone you trust puts them in front of you. The deposits kept coming. They went into an account I no longer had a clear view of, managed by a man I had married, funneled in directions I did not track, and I went to work. I was a caseworker for a family services non-profit in Scarborough. It was not a high-paying job. It was the kind of work you take because you believe in it, not because it will cover your rent in a city where rent is a mathematical crisis. Callum told me not to worry about money. He told me he was investing. He told me his side consulting business was growing and that things were fine, and that I was too anxious about finances, always had been, probably something to work through. His mother, who had by this point inserted herself into our lives with the confidence of a fixed piece of furniture, agreed that I worried too much and that Callum was very responsible with money. She had raised him to be, she would know. Wendy had opinions about many things. She had opinions about how I organized the kitchen, about whether our apartment was in a good enough neighborhood, about how I spent my evenings, about whether social work was a practical career for a woman in her late 20s. She delivered these opinions in the tone of someone offering generous advice, which made it difficult to object without appearing ungrateful. I tried several times to talk to Callum about it. He said she meant well. He said I was being sensitive. He said it wasn't worth making an issue of. I believed him, or I wanted to. There is a difference, and I understand the difference now in a way I did not then. When I got pregnant, I was happy. Genuinely, completely happy in the way that cuts through everything else for a while. We were expecting in March. I kept working until I had to stop, which was late January, because I could not afford the full leave I had wanted. My top-up would only cover so much, and I told myself we would manage. We had been managing. I did not tell my grandmother how tight things were. She would have asked questions I was not ready to answer, because some part of me already knew the answers would be things I did not want to say out loud. The baby came on a Friday in March. A girl. We named her Faye. She had dark eyes and very small hands, and she arrived 12 days early and screaming, which the nurses said was a good sign, and I believed them. The first weeks are a kind of fog I will not try to fully describe. What I will say is that somewhere in that fog I started to notice things I had been too busy or too willing to overlook before. The heat in our apartment had been inconsistent all winter, and I had not pushed to get it fixed because I was afraid of what it would cost. I had not bought new clothes in almost a year, not because I did not want to, but because every time I looked at my account the number was not what I expected it to be, and I did not look too closely because looking too closely felt like something I could not afford to do emotionally. I was wearing a coat that was 4 years old. I was wearing jeans that had a seam coming apart at the knee that I had sewn up twice. My grandmother came to visit when Faye was 6 weeks old. It was a Tuesday. She brought a bag of groceries from the St. Lawrence market and a hand-knitted blanket that she said had been made by a woman at her church, and took one look at me and did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Isla, where has the trust gone?" It was not a question, quite. It was the way she says things when she already suspects the answer and wants to give you the chance to tell her yourself. I said I did not know what she meant. She set the groceries down on the counter and looked at me with the expression I have seen her use in business meetings when someone has said something she finds very disappointing. She said she had been depositing funds into the account she set up for me every month since I was 25. She said the amounts were not small. She said she had assumed I was investing or saving or doing something sensible with the money, and she had not asked because she had believed I would tell her if something was wrong. I said I had never seen any of it. The kitchen was very quiet. Faye was asleep in the other room. I could hear the radiator. My grandmother picked up her phone. She did not call Callum. She called her accountant first, and then she called her lawyer, and then she sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad she had taken from her bag. She always carries a legal pad, and she began to write things down. She asked me questions in the measured way she asks questions when she is collecting information rather than having a conversation. When did we get married? What did I sign in the first weeks? Did I have copies? Did I have access to any of the original account documentation? Did Callum have a business account separate from our household account? I answered what I could. Some of it I did not know. The not knowing was the worst part. Not the anger, not the shock, but the realization of how thoroughly I had been managed out of my own financial life without ever noticing it was happening. That evening, Callum came home to find my grandmother still sitting at the kitchen table. He was not expecting her. I could see the calculation happen behind his eyes, the split second where he read the room and adjusted. He was very pleasant. He offered her tea. He asked about her drive. He sat down and crossed one ankle over his knee and gave her the easy smile that I had once found so reassuring. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, "I'd like you to explain the transfers." He said he wasn't sure what she meant. She said she was sure he did. What happened over the following weeks I will condense because the details are procedural and painful in equal measure. My grandmother's lawyer sent a formal demand. Callum's initial position was that the money had been invested on my behalf, that the accounts would show legitimate activity, that this was a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding did not survive contact with a forensic accountant. The funds, over 4 years of monthly deposits, had been moved systematically. Some into a numbered company Callum had registered in Alberta, some into accounts connected to a small real estate venture he had started with a friend, some into expenses that were categorically his or his mother's and could not be described as household spending by any reasonable standard. Wendy had received money. Not a small amount. Callum had been sending her monthly transfers from funds that were not his to send. The number, when it was finally put in front of me in a document with my lawyer's letterhead at the top, made me sit very still for a long time. I filed for divorce. My grandmother's legal team had the numbered company frozen within a week of the forensic review. There were negotiations, there were documents. There was a period of several months in which I had to recount the same sequence of events to the same rotation of lawyers and financial investigators, and I had to do it without flinching, which got easier each time, or at least more automatic. Callum, to his credit, or perhaps simply because he had no viable alternative, did not fight the civil claim. The settlement returned a significant portion of what had been taken. Not all of it. The legal fees ate into the recovery in the way legal fees do, and some of what had gone into the Alberta company had already been spent in ways that were difficult to fully claw back. But the core of what my grandmother had set aside for me over years of her life came back. Most of it. His mother did not return anything voluntarily. Her portion became its own proceeding, slower and more contentious. And I will not say how it resolved, because some of it is still ongoing, and because thinking about Wendy requires an energy I am conserving for things that matter more. What I want to say, what I have thought about most in the months since all of this started to settle, is how long I spent explaining things to myself that did not need my explanation. The heat in the apartment was fine. The money was being invested. Callum was better with finances. I was too anxious. I was too sensitive. I worried too much. Every uncomfortable thing I noticed had a version of itself that was my fault or my misreading. And I chose those versions because the alternative was a truth I was not yet ready to carry. My grandmother never said "I told you so." I want to be clear about that. She is not that kind of woman. What she said when I finally apologized to her one afternoon in her kitchen on Roxburgh Drive was that I had nothing to apologize for. She said manipulation is a thing that works precisely because it operates on trust, and that having trusted someone was not the same thing as having been foolish, and that she wanted me to understand the difference. It took me a while to hold on to that. Some days I still have to remind myself. Faye is 8 months old now. She is trying to pull herself upright against the coffee table, and she has opinions about peas, and she makes a sound when she is happy that I cannot describe, except to say it rearranges something in me every time I hear it. I moved back to the east end of the city, a proper apartment this time, with a bedroom for Faye and a window in the kitchen that faces east, so the morning light comes in before I have had my coffee, which helps. My grandmother visits on Tuesdays. She brings things from the market. She sits in the chair by the window and holds Faye and reads her the newspaper the way she once read it to me, in the same chair in a different house, when I was small and the world felt larger than I could account for. It was not the money that mattered in the end. The money was the evidence. What mattered was what the evidence proved. That someone had looked at my life, at my trust, at the thing my grandmother had built for me with decades of her own work, and had decided it was available to him. Had decided I was. He was wrong about that. I know that now, in a way, I can say clearly, without hedging, without the old instinct to soften it. He was wrong, and the woman who sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and did not say "I told you so." She was right all along, in the way she is always right, not loudly, not with satisfaction, just quietly and completely, the way she does everything that matters. I think about the legal pad a lot. That yellow legal pad Eleanor pulled out of her bag and set on my kitchen table like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she had been carrying it precisely for this moment, which, knowing her, she probably had. She did not cry. She did not tell me she had warned me. She just started writing things down, asking questions in that measured way of hers, and in doing so she handed me something I had not had in years, the experience of someone treating my situation as a problem that could be solved rather than a mistake I deserved to live with. What Callum did was a choice he made over and over again for years. Every transfer, every redirected deposit, every time he put something in front of me to sign and framed it as routine, those were decisions. And the thing about that kind of sustained deception is that it only works when the other person is extending trust. He did not outwit me. He borrowed against my willingness to believe in him, and he spent it until there was nothing left. I spent a long time being angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I've mostly stopped doing that, because I understand now that what I was actually doing was trusting someone I had chosen to build a life with, and that trusting people is not the same thing as being naive. It is something you do because the alternative, moving through the world assuming everyone around you is calculating against you, is not a life I want to live. What I am learning to do instead is pay attention, to notice when something feels wrong and take that feeling seriously rather than explaining it away. That is the part of me Callum's choices damaged most, that instinct. I am working on getting it back. Eleanor built what she built because she paid attention. She noticed things and she acted on what she noticed, and she did not let anyone talk her out of what she could see clearly. That is not a personality trait she was born with. I have heard enough of her stories to know she learned it, often at cost. What I got to watch her do at my kitchen table that Tuesday was the result of decades of choosing to look clearly at difficult things, even when it would have been easier to look away. Faye will grow up knowing this story, when she is old enough, not as a lesson about bad men or broken marriages, but as a story about a woman who showed up with a legal pad and did not flinch. I want her to understand that the ability to look at an uncomfortable truth and do something with it, to have the integrity to act on what you know, and the clarity of mind to understand what you're looking at, and the will to keep going when the process is slow and painful and expensive. Those things are available to her. They are not given, but they are available. Eleanor built them. I am building them. And when Faye is 25 or 30, or whenever life asks her to use them, I want her to know they were always already hers to develop. I am still tired. Some days the whole thing still sits in my chest like something that did not fully dissolve. But Faye made a sound this morning that I can only describe as triumphant. She had grabbed the edge of the coffee table and pulled herself halfway upright and looked at me like she expected applause, and I gave it to her. Fully and without reservation, because that is what you do when someone you love does something hard. Eleanor taught me that, not in words. In every Tuesday she showed up,